Welcome back. We start our news bulletin from Spain, where 637 COVID-19 patients have died in the last 24 hours, bringing the total number of fatalities to over 13,000. Iran has confirmed another 136 deaths, taking the total to over 3,700, with 60,500 total infections. Meanwhile, the U.S. COVID-19 death toll is nearing 10,000. This report has more.
As governments across the world continue to struggle with the pandemic, the U.S. has entered in one of its most critical weeks of the crisis. Government officials say the rising death tolls in the states of New York, Michigan, and Louisiana is a sign of trouble. They warn America will face its hardest and saddest week, even worse than Pearl Harbor and 9/11 incidents. But President Donald Trump has expressed hope that the U.S. is seeing a leveling off of the coronavirus crisis in some of the nation's hot spots.
They've really become a very hot zone, but some very good things are happening. In New York, the first time where the deaths were less from the previous day. That's the first drop so far, so maybe that's a good sign. It could be. And the hospital levels are starting to perhaps decrease.
Europe has begun to see glimmers of hope, with Italy's death toll at its lowest in more than 2 weeks and its infection curve on a downward slope. Spain has also recorded a drop in the number of new deaths for a third straight day, but in the UK, Prime Minister Boris Johnson has been admitted to a hospital after showing persistent symptoms of COVID-19. UK's Deputy Chief Medical Officer says Britain has enough critical care capacity to treat patients with the virus.
London, we all know, has been working super hard on the front line, and those cases continue to rise now with an increase over the last 24 hours in the northwest. We still, as the Secretary of State has said, have capacity in all of our hospitals to manage these cases, and we're hoping in due course, if everybody continues to practice social distancing, that those cases will start to fall.
Elsewhere, China has reported 39 new cases and a surge in asymptomatic patients of the virus. The National Health Commission said 78 new asymptomatic cases have been identified, compared with 47 the day before.
Meanwhile, in Pakistan, 5 people have died from the coronavirus in the last 24 hours, bringing the death toll to 50. The Health Ministry says nearly 400 new cases were reported in a day, raising the total to 3,277. The ministry said 257 patients of coronavirus have recovered so far across the country. It said the Punjab province leads in infection cases with 1,493, while Sindh has 881 infected patients. Northern Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province has 405 cases, while 191 are confirmed in Balochistan. Earlier, Pakistan's Planning Minister Asad Umar said the country has slowed down the spread of the coronavirus due to social distancing. Speaking in Islamabad, Umar said Pakistan has increased its coronavirus testing capacity and will continue to do so. Moving towards India, where Amnesty International has asked Assam's government to release captives from detention centers amid COVID-19 threat. In a statement, it said Indian citizens declared as foreigners in a discriminatory manner are being kept in inhumane conditions in the detention centers. The body said the state government must understand detainees face a high risk of infection of the deadly virus. It said some detention centers with a capacity of about 250 inmates have up to 400 prisoners in them. Quoting a former detainee, the body said 60 to 70 prisoners are being kept in one room with no ventilation. Last year, India declared around 2 million people in Assam, mostly Muslims, stateless under National Citizen Register. In India, the United Nurses Association has filed a petition in Supreme Court saying the medical staff is ill-equipped against COVID-19. The organization said the government has not formulated national management protocol for COVID-19 to address serious concerns. In its petition, the association said medical personnel are facing extreme risks while treating coronavirus patients. It said health workers are at front of the fight against pandemic and are exposed to hazards that put them at risk of infection. It said medics are facing long working hours, psychological distress, stigma, occupational burnout, and physical and psychological violence. India has so far reported 118 deaths from the virus and over 4,000 infections so far. Moving on to Iraq, where 3 rockets have landed near the American oil service company Halliburton site in Basra. No casualties have been reported after the attack. In a statement, the Iraqi military said a launcher with 11 unfired rockets was found in the vicinity. The military said no group has immediately claimed responsibility for the rocket fire. It said the latest attack was the first since last summer to target U.S. energy companies working in the oil-rich South. Halliburton is an American oil service provider working in the Zubair oil field, which is operated by the Italian Eni. Turkey says it has killed 5 militants of the Kurdistan Workers' Party in a counter-terrorist operation in northern Iraq. In a statement, Defense Ministry said the military carried out operations backed by air power in the Hakkok and Avasin Bazian regions. The ministry said Turkey will continue to destroy weapon caches and shelters used by the terrorists. It said over 400 Kurdish militants have been killed in northern Iraq over the past 5 months. Turkey holds the PKK responsible for the deaths of some 40,000 people in a 30-year conflict. Yemen's Prime Minister Ma'in Abdul Malik says the Houthi rebels continue to commit hideous crimes against the civilians. In a statement, Abdul Malik said the attack on Taiz prison is a clear indication of the rebels' motive to go on with a hostile policy. On Sunday, the militant group attacked the women's section of Taiz prison, killing 6 inmates and wounding dozens of others. Abdul Malik said the rebels have rejected to establish truce and peace in the region. He said Houthis' attacks are solid proof to the international community that the militia is determined to further deepen the conflict. Yemen has been entangled in violence since 2014 after Houthis overran much of the country, including the capital, Sana'a. Meanwhile, Palestine's Islamic Jihad resistance movement has urged Israel to lift its blockade of the Gaza Strip amid COVID-19 threat. In a statement, the movement said Tel Aviv must choose between releasing Palestinian prisoners or facing the consequences of the pandemic. The organization said it will protect Palestinians if they face any trouble due to Israeli blockade. It said Palestinians should adopt a firmer stance against Israel, whose blockade has made the daily life difficult. Since 2006, Israel has imposed a blockade on the Gaza Strip, which houses nearly 2 million Palestinians. In the Gaza Strip, 12 people have been diagnosed with the coronavirus so far. The United Nations has dispatched 59 truckloads of humanitarian aid to Idlib in northwestern Syria. Millions of people are in desperate need of assistance in these conflict areas. Trucks entered the city through Turkey's southern Hatay province, which borders Idlib. The supplies will be distributed to people struggling to survive in Idlib and nearby rural areas. Syria has been mired in a vicious civil war since early 2011, when the Assad regime cracked down on pro-democracy protesters. According to the UN, hundreds of thousands of people have since been killed. Taking a short break, but stay with us. In Libya, the UN-recognized Government of National Accord says it has hit a military cargo plane of Khalifa Haftar's Eastern Army in southern Tripoli. Libyan Army spokesman Mohammed Gunonu said the aircraft was loaded with ammunition and weapons for Haftar's forces. He said it was targeted minutes after landing in a Tarhuna airstrip. Officials said the aircraft was an Antonov and was hit by a Libyan Air Force drone strike. They said forces set up the new airstrip in Tarhuna urgently to receive ammunition for their fighters. Libya has been torn apart by a civil war between the GNA and the Libyan National Army since April last year. Meanwhile, Libya's former Prime Minister Mahmoud Jibril has died in Cairo after contracting the coronavirus. Ex-head of rebel government had been quarantined at a hospital in the Egyptian capital since 26 March. Jibril was the interim leader until the country held its first free elections in 4 decades in 2012. He was a former technocrat and was sidelined following a law which banned former Gaddafi officials from public office. Libya is now split between an internationally recognized government in Tripoli and rival forces led by the Eastern military commander Khalifa Haftar. The number of coronavirus cases has exceeded 8,500 in the African continent. The Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention said 360 people have died from the virus in 50 countries. The number of coronavirus cases hit over 8,500, while 710 patients recovered from the virus. The countries with the highest number of cases are South Africa, Algeria, Egypt, Morocco, and Cameroon, respectively. Earlier, South Sudan confirmed its first case of COVID-19. Vice President Riek Machar said South Sudan, with 11 million people, has only 4 ventilators. Meanwhile, Ethiopia has reported its first death from the virus and announced 5 more cases, bringing its total to 43. European tourists stranded in the Latin American countries of Bolivia and Peru are flying back home. French, Spanish, and some Belgian tourists boarded flights with the help of Bolivia's French embassy. This report will now tell you more.
Top EU diplomat Joseph Borrell said the repatriation of EU nationals began in mid-March. He said the number of people looking to return is increasing as more of them seek assistance through their embassies. Arranging such flights has become exceedingly difficult as most countries have banned air travel to contain the COVID-19 pandemic.
In view of the situation now, I have not been with my family in Belgium for a year. I am seeing what is happening and I think it would be better to return, although my heart and my will say no. I would like to stay here longer.
Officials said over 250,000 European citizens remain trapped abroad, even after the EU's repatriation of about 350,000 people.
Moving on, Singapore has placed 20,000 foreign migrant workers into lockdown for 14 days as coronavirus cases surge in the city-state. 2 dormitories housing mostly South Asian construction workers have been isolated. One dormitory has about 13,000 workers and 63 virus cases, while the other dormitory houses 6,800 workers and has 28 COVID-19 cases. Officials said the workers will be paid and given 3 meals a day. Last week, the government announced a circuit breaker policy to begin from Tuesday, similar to the lockdown seen in other countries. In Indonesia, a 6.1 magnitude earthquake has jolted the Maluku province. Meteorology said the epicenter was located 122 kilometers northwest of Jailolo at a depth of 10 kilometers. The agency said the quake did not pose a potential threat for tsunami. It said tremors were also felt in nearby province of North Sulawesi in the central part of the country. There are no immediate reports of casualties or property damages. Greece has placed a second migrant camp near Athens under lockdown after an Afghan resident tested positive for the coronavirus. Migration Ministry says camp in Malakasa has been placed under isolation for 14 days with no one allowed to enter or leave. The ministry said the Malakasa facility currently shelters over 1,700 people. First outbreak surfaced last week at a facility in Ritsuna near Athens, where 23 people out of over 2,500 have tested positive. Tens of thousands of asylum seekers are living in dire conditions in Greek camps. Campaigners have called to evacuate migrants in overcrowded camps amid coronavirus pandemic. Moria camp on Lesbos Island has been repeatedly criticized for inhumane living conditions as it hosts over 20,000 refugees. In the US, a 4-year-old Malayan tiger has tested positive for the novel coronavirus at the Bronx Zoo in New York City. This is the first known case of a human infecting an animal with COVID-19. Zoo officials said the test result was confirmed by the National Veterinary Services Laboratory in Iowa. They said Nadia, along with 6 other big cats, are thought to have been infected by the asymptomatic zookeeper.
We tested for common viral and bacterial pathogens of domestic cats, because that, of course, is much more likely to have been the cause of the infection. But of course, because New York City is in the middle of, this COVID pandemic and we're the epicenter for the U.S., it was logical to wonder and worry whether she could have been infected too.
The UN says greenhouse gas emissions are down and air quality has improved during the worldwide lockdown over COVID-19 pandemic. But UN's head of environment program, Inga Anderson, has cautioned against viewing this as a boon for the environment. In an editorial, Anderson said reduced emissions are temporary as they come amid a tragic economic slowdown and human distress. She said the outbreak will have profound and lasting economic and social consequences in every corner of the globe. Anderson said the pandemic will also result in an increase in the amounts of medical and hazardous waste. The UN Environment Chief said only long-term systemic shifts will change the trajectory of carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere. The UN has urged world governments to include the protection of women from domestic violence in their response to deadly COVID-19 pandemic. Secretary General Antonio Guterres called for an emergency setup for women to seek support without alerting their abusers. Meanwhile, in the K domestic abuse helpline, calls have jumped 25% since the enforcement of lockdown. Charity Refugees says National Domestic Abuse Helpline received hundreds of more calls last week compared to 2 weeks earlier. It said visits to the helpline website for information were 150% higher than during the last week of February. For our top business story, Moscow has once again expressed its readiness to coordinate with other leading oil exporting countries to help stabilize the global oil market. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said that talks between OPEC and other leading oil producers were delayed until Thursday for technical reasons. He said preparations for the meeting were underway. Meanwhile, the head of Russia's Wealth Fund, Kirill Dmitriev, said Saudi Arabia and Russia are close to a deal on oil production cuts. Tech giant Apple says it will start making face shields for medical workers fighting COVID-19. In a video on Twitter, Chief Executive Tim Cook said Apple is aiming to produce 1 million face masks per week. Cook said the equipment will be supplied first to the U.S. medical workers and then distributed globally. He said Apple has also sourced 20 million face masks, which it is donating worldwide to help prevent the spread of the virus. Meanwhile, in the UK, defense firm Bangkok said it will manufacture 10,000 ventilators to help deal with the coronavirus crisis. European markets are trading higher as the rate of coronavirus infections appears to be slowing in the region. Frankfurt DAX is trading over 3.5% higher over fresh rally in stocks. CAC 40 in Paris has gained over 3%. London's FTSE 100 is trading about 2% higher as British security firm G4 stocks jumped 22%. In Asia, Nikkei 225 led the gains, closing over 4% higher as shares of SoftBank Group soared over 7.5%. Seoul's Kospi and Hang Seng Index gained ground while Shanghai Composite lost over 0.5%. Meanwhile, international benchmark Brent crude oil price is trading 2% lower. Cyclone Harold has reached the Pacific nation of Vanuatu with winds of 250 kilometers per hour. The cyclone has been classified as a Category 5 storm. Vanuatu is home to around 300,000 people and is already in a state of emergency because of the coronavirus. The Red Cross says the cyclone has blown roofs of buildings and brought down power lines. It said some people have taken shelter in caves to protect themselves. Cyclone Harold has already killed 27 people in Solomon Islands after the victims were swept off a ferry that defied storm warnings. Now let's look at the weather from around the globe. This is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.